So yes, my name is Jamila Wilson. I am the interim director of our Climate and Disaster Resilience Department at United Way of the Columbia-Willamette. And I'm excited to share with you this webinar and to also provide folks with information about our most recent ALICE report that United Way of Northern New Jersey has put together and that our United Way has supported. And so we're going to have Mark Tucker, our Chief Strategy Officer, share a bit about our recent ALICE report.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamila. So again, I'm Mark Tucker with United Way of the Columbia-Willamette. And as Jamila mentioned, the ALICE report was created by the United Ways of Northern New Jersey and Rutgers University. And the first report came out in 2012. And since then, they've been able to see a pattern in families that are struggling county by county across the United States. This report that was just released, we have partnered with United Ways of the Pacific Northwest to bring this report to Oregon. So I believe we will put in the chat the URL, which is just unitedforalice.org/Oregon. And that takes you right to the report. What the report tells us is that 42% of our population are struggling to make ends meet. Many people have heard of the federal poverty level, and of course, that is a significant challenge in our population, but more than double of the 13% of those that are under the federal poverty level are ALICE. So an additional 30% of our population earn above the federal poverty level, but struggle to make ends meet. The great thing about this report is it has been created with local costs of living. The federal poverty level is outdated and it uses national data for expenses. However, there is a local research team that develops county by county cost of living to compare to income levels for our communities. And that's where we get that information, and it is much more relevant and much more tangible to those that are in our communities struggling to make ends meet. There's a couple of places on the website, and I encourage people to look at this. This is the kind of report where there's a lot of information, and it's really beneficial to jump in and see what resonates with you and connects with your work and helps you tell your story. So there's a section that's key findings that's in the navigation bar, and that's the best place to start. It explains what different pieces of the report entail. And including the cost of basics, which is the ALICE household budget. And then the other pieces are the legislative map tool, which is done nationally, but you can scale down into local districts. And that will really help with advocacy to speak to legislators, because you can focus in on those that are struggling in their districts, because we all know that legislators care about their voters more than they care about the entire state. So that definitely helps tell the story. A big piece of what this story has told us, and this data that was just released tells us, is that people of color and minorities struggle at a higher rate. 41% of white households are struggling to make ends meet, 50% of Hispanic households are struggling, and 61% of Black households are struggling to make ends meet in the state. So that definitely paints a picture and helps us drive our work in what we're doing. You think about preparedness and resiliency. This ALICE acronym is for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So these individuals don't have assets to prepare for a financial disaster or be resilient in challenging times. So I think this is something that really resonates with the conversation we're having today, but certainly can be used to talk to media, talk to legislators, and talk to funders. They're all getting very familiar with this report, and so we're happy to bring it to you to use in your fundraising efforts. So I hope you take a look at the report, bounce around. There's a lot of different sections to look at, but it is really great and useful information that resonates well. So thank you for letting me join you, and look forward to listening in on the rest of this training.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark, for that valuable information. Um, so we'll go ahead and move on to our main speaker, Miss Anna Marie Jones. She is the Chief Resilient Officer at Interpol. And we are beyond excited to introduce her to a larger audience. So, in our department, the Climate and Disaster Resilience Department, we help steward. We're one of three program leads for the Disaster Resilience Learning Network. And we've brought Ms. Jones to speak and offer trainings in the past to our members. And it has been received with great energy and excitement and passion. In fact, one of the things that was really exciting was a week after we had a training with Miss Anna Marie, we had two members that utilized some of the resources she shared to support them while they were navigating some car trouble. So, this information she provides is not just valuable during disasters, but ways by which we can tap into resources we have access to right now to support us in emergency preparedness. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Miss Anna Marie Jones.
Thank you so much, Jamila, and really thank you to everyone at United Way and all of you with the Learning Network. I am beyond excited to be here today just because, one, this is one of my favorite topics in the world, but also I have a long, loving relationship towards the United Way, which you will hear about in just a minute. I am going to, throughout this presentation, share several tips and just things we have learned over the years that really help to make any organization, one, more of a learning organization, but certainly an organization that is more resilient now as well as they move forward and build more skills. I'd also say, please, if you have questions, this is the place to ask them. It won't throw me off. And Ms. Jamila, if you would feel absolutely empowered to speak up and ask questions as they come up, because I won't be able to be looking in the chat at the same time that I'm presenting. So let us look. All righty. So what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to give you a bit about background and a little rapid fire history, because as we all know, if we don't understand history, we become doomed to repeat it. And one of the things we want from today is for you to leave here with so much more awareness and much more of a level of power to advocate for yourselves, your communities, and basically the greater populace when it comes to preparedness, response, recovery, all of those pieces. The great information that Mark shared at the beginning will absolutely play into the level of resilience that any community will have. So that'll be part of the history, but also we're going to be doing quite a bit on making sure we have a clear distinction between what you're familiar with, which is disaster-centered preparedness. But then we will be talking about what community-centered resilience looks like. They get lumped together in the traditional emergency management world, but they are wildly, wildly different. So disaster-centered preparedness is one thing, community-centered resilience is another. We will, of course, be going deep into what we call the prepare to prosper approach. It is named that because we are not, absolutely not talking about preparing for all of the millions of disasters, but we are talking about preparing you and your organizations so that you are strong and resilient and able to step up no matter what it is that you are called upon to face. And that is a key distinction. And also, of course, next steps and Q&A. The little bit of background that you should know specifically about me is that, number one, while I'm coming to you from sunny, glorious Oakland, California, I am not a Californian. I am a born and raised New York City person. So if you were expecting a laid-back California girl, no, I am a blunt New Yorker, so I'm going to be incredibly direct. And, that's kind of how I roll. Number two is that my first career path was advertising and marketing research. So every single thing you hear today comes from the fact that I always approached all things to do with preparedness as sort of a marketing problem we have yet to genuinely solve, right? That was my initial orientation into the work world and into adult life, was advertising and marketing research. So when I fell into emergency management professionally, that's what I brought to the table. And the last thing is that I got my very first emergency preparedness, community resilience role when I was 3.5 years old. And that was because my little sister was born. That's my little sister, Lisa. And when Lisa was born, my parents sat me down and told me that I was getting a little sister, and that as a big sister, my job in the world was to protect my little sister. So I became that nerdy little child who looked at safety and protection and preparedness as my job, my role, my responsibility. So I never had preparedness, response, recovery, any of that as the thing you do because of disasters. For me personally, preparedness was always about loving my little sister and having my parents be proud of me. And it was all positive and all very, very good. So when you see that, it's not just because, yes, marketing was my thing, and that's one of the things I brought to the table, but it's also because personally, preparedness was a wonderful, good, and positive thing that was about loving your family. It was never about the horrible and terrible things that could befall you. So that's the key stuff to know about me. The thing I will ask of all of us is to be open and courageous. I know for some people, even just talking about the words disaster and readiness and all of that can be a little intimidating and can be triggering for some. So I'm going to ask you to, one, take a deep breath and know that we are not going to be looking at hideous images. We are not going to be talking about that piece of the world, but to please be open and courageous. Some things are going to need to change. Some people have very fixed opinions about the need to say or do certain things. I'm asking you to try it on just differently, just for this call. I'm going to ask many questions, and one of the greatest things that you can do is to help make the chat function a resource. So I'm going to ask you many questions. My request is to answer them. And if I ask you to put something in the chat, please go to the chat. And that way, at the end of this, you will have a living resource and a better way of knowing your community. And also, one of the great things we can do is to leave here knowing each other better. And that's one of the places where we can do it. I'll also ask you to take notes and contribute your wisdom to this conversation. That's part of the Prepare to Prosper model. That's one of the key behaviors, is that we genuinely embrace the wisdom of our immediate community. So let's do the history piece. I don't know how many of you remember the Loma Prieta earthquake. If you do remember the earthquake, if you were one of the people who's old enough to have watched it and remember it, Game 3 was interrupted by the World Series. And I cannot tell you, well, Game 3 was interrupted by the earthquake. I cannot tell you how important that is to the history of the nonprofit preparedness movement. I cannot overstate this. It was because we had the media of the world looking at our community, right? It was the Battle of the Bay. So it was two Bay Area baseball teams. And when the earthquake struck, it was right before the third game. And so we had international media, and it was the first live earthquake coverage, period. Right? So this was a big, big deal. We had international coverage. We had journalists from all over the world in the audience at the stadium watching everything happen. So this had an unbelievable level of coverage that brought in millions and millions of dollars more than most disasters would even expect to raise. But what we also saw was that the world then watched that we didn't know how to handle the population that lived here in the Bay Area. And honestly, despite incredible effort, because we had some of the most experienced emergency management organizations here in the Bay Area, we didn't have a prayer of addressing the immediate short-term or long-term needs of vulnerable people. Some noteworthy examples, everything went out in English. Everything, everything, everything. The first several days of the disaster, it was English language material only. Anybody want to guess how long we had known that we had people speaking many languages in the Bay Area? You can put it in the chat, but I can guarantee you we had always known that we were a place not just for immigrants, but for tourists. So we were unable to address that. This was before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So literally, if you used a walker, a wheelchair, anything like that, you couldn't get into buildings. You could not get into porta potties. You could not do any of the things that you just needed to do to just move ahead. So CARD was created. CARD stands for Collaborating Agencies Responding to Disaster. Hereafter, I will always refer to it as CARD because nobody would remember the whole thing. But it was basically a nonprofit agency that worked entirely from the perspective of work with the local agencies, do what the local agencies needed to get prepared, and to make sure that the partners understood that we were creating something different, which, by the way, was incredibly controversial. To do something different in the world of emergency management was bucking the system, right? In emergency management, everyone pressured everyone else to use the same messaging. So for example, it was a very big deal if you were going to tell people that they needed a kit, which was the standard message. Everyone wanted everyone to say, you need 3 days worth of food. That was the message. And to say anything else was really considered inappropriate and wrong and basically a problem for people. And I mentioned this earlier, this is why I will always love the United Ways, and I will always do whatever I can to support United Ways. The United Way of the Bay Area became our key funding partner. They funded CARD and other CARD-like groups in other counties, and it was absolutely a function of that funding that allowed us to basically get a hold on this conversation and to understand why this was so hard for people to understand. The lessons learned when you look back after the earthquake was there was a very good reason nonprofits had struggled mightily to be part of any of this. It was so completely against the way nonprofits think and the way their structures, whether it's staffing structure, funding structures, their missions, using fear and threat. I mean, these are nonprofits that are serving our seniors, our children, our people with disability, our, people who are in domestic violence shelters, going at them with a fear and threat-based message, bringing the level of bureaucracy that government can bring to these conversations, and also trying to get them to prioritize the earthquake that could happen 30 years from now when they were dealing with the immediate needs of vulnerable people. None of that worked for the nonprofits. Can anybody relate to that? Why that is such an overwhelming topic and an unrealistic expectation that nonprofits would be able to jump into this. So ultimately, once I came on board, it was a matter of, okay, we've got to change this. We've got to change our messaging. We've got to change the tools. We have to change virtually everything about this because none of it worked for our nonprofits. Even the largest of nonprofits could not sustain trying to be part of this whole disaster conversation. Just so we're clear, every single day we always have a particular level of disaster clouds hanging above us, right? I tried to find what would be the least oppressive way of listing the many, many disasters that are always present. And so here is the disaster cloud. But what's true is that the list of disasters for which you could be expected to get ready for is very, very long. This is just a small section of them. And honestly, you could go very deep. If you look just at the word terrorism, it could be regular garden variety terrorism. It could be cyber terror. It could be biological terror, right? It could be any of those. If you talk about something like infrastructure failure, it could be the infrastructure known as overpasses, underpasses, bridges, dams, all of these different things. Transportation failures could be airplanes, could be trains, could be any number of things. So the level of just nuance inside many of these categories is incredible. And you'll notice some of the things are teeny tiny, but they're enormous issues when they actually happen in a community, right? An active shooter event, or an oil spill. These things can absolutely disrupt a community for years, but in the grand continuum, this is what it looks like. And to be clear, we've spent over 100 years and many billions of dollars trying to get people to take on readiness and resilience using this particular framework. And here's the framework that you're all familiar with. And remember, we want you to genuinely understand the framework, because from here on out, one of the things we'd be looking for is for you to understand which messages should not even be shared, which messages can you trust. It makes the difference for you to have this level of clarity. So in the disaster-centered preparedness, you're always talking about the disasters. It's your reason for doing anything. The official messengers are all agencies whose missions are all about disasters. So that's Red Cross and FEMA and fire departments and offices of emergency services, all of those agencies. And I'd ask you to just think about for a moment what those agencies have in common. And you could please put it in the chat. And Jamila, if people put answers in the chat, you can let me know. But if you're looking at why this does not work for our nonprofit partners, for our faith agencies, and for service providers, if you just think about why it doesn't work for these agencies that are listed there to become the be-all and end-all for reaching our most vulnerable communities, it should be pretty clear. None of those agencies have day-to-day responsibility for the vulnerable communities. Absolutely none of them. That's not their mission. It's not their mindset. It's not the muscle that they bring to the table. So in a crisis, of course, they don't have what they need to support our communities. And of course, we're all familiar with getting brochures and pamphlets and papers and all of the different things. The standardized message for many decades has been that you should get a kit and you should make a plan and you should be informed. And that's what you should do personally. And then, of course, they want agencies, nonprofits, government partners to also do the same thing. Have kits with materials, have different plans, disaster response plans and that sort of thing, but to be trained and be informed, right? Then, of course, the entire reason you're supposed to do it is because these horrible things are going to happen. And you're always being reminded that you're going to be on your own, right? For 3 to 5 days, maybe even longer. Basically, they tell you to shop and do all of these things, buy all the stuff and take all the courses and classes and do the stuff. And of course, they always tell you to do it right after there's a disaster or when there's an anniversary. One thing to really take note of is that in 2006, when they did a great big survey about the level of readiness, they did it because they had spent a year doing the commemorative campaign for the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. They came up with 6% called themselves prepared in California after this multi-million-dollar year-long preparedness campaign. If you know anything about how the public prepares, and if you know anything about statistics, that is a terrible number. The reason it's terrible is because if you count up all of the faith organizations that have preparedness as part of their belief system, and if you count up the people whose jobs require preparedness, you get just over 6%. So think about that. If you count up all those faith groups, because, like the Church of the Mormon Church, right? The Church of the Latter-day Saints, they have preparedness deeply embedded in their belief system. They don't need a brochure from government or Red Cross telling them to do it. They're going to do it anyway. If your job requires you to be wheels up and ready, you have that as well. So we put in billions of dollars over the years doing these things, and we barely move the needle. The thing I would really want for you to embrace is that using fear is harmful to the people you serve. Number one, it doesn't work. And by the way, you can pull this up. It's easily searchable. It is not even difficult research to do. You can just look up fear, uncertainty, and doubt and those types of campaigns, and they will tell you that they will not work. They are actually incredibly harmful to some people because it increases their level of anxiety, threat, distrust, Why should you trust somebody that is always threatening you? And the other thing to remember is that, yeah, you can scare people into doing things, right? You can scare people into clicking a link. You can scare people into voting in a particular way. But if what you're looking for is long-term volitional behavior change, right? You want people to take on something, do it forever, do it because they want to, because you can't force them to do it, and you're actually asking them to do it differently. That's what matters. We also have lots of evidence that all of the campaigns that are built like preparedness, where you're telling people about the horrible and terrible and using graphic image and graphic language, it doesn't work. Some of you are probably parents whose kids had to go through the DARE program, the Drug Awareness Resistance Education, or Scared Straight, which is basically trying to stop kids from doing crime, or Abstinence Only, which was designed to make kids remain abstinent until marriage. And the last point I want to make is you can go and look at this great research from Dr. Rocky Lopes. Basically, if you show people horrible pictures from disasters, right, which is really popular in emergency management, by the way, it stops them from actually taking action. It makes them remember that they saw the presentation, but it makes them not take action. It feels futile. It feels overwhelming. It feels triggering. So, I mean, really, there are many things I'd like you to take from this presentation, but one of them is do not have your organization be the one that contributes to adding fear and threat to this conversation. Does that make sense to everybody? If everybody is on board with the not using fear, please put it in the chat. And by the way, this impacts everyone, and it had a big impact up by you. If you look at the subtitle on this article, and this happened 10 years ago, the New Yorker magazines called it the really big one, and it said an earthquake will destroy a sizable portion of the coastal Northwest. The question is when. I don't know if any of you remember when that publication came out, but it caused quite the flurry of many things. One, real estate agents basically checking to see if this is true. People were calling the offices of elected officials, and it was because Tom Broker, who is a great guy, he works for the USGS, he's a scientist. What he said that the big earthquake could happen at any time, which of course is true. The journalist who was covering it quoted it as any day now. And the difference between any day now and at any time is quite large, but it still triggered major anxiety and lots of backpedaling and so much upset just because somebody went with the more fearful way of articulating it. And so that, you know, all of the traditional emergency management agencies at one point knew that this does not work. I know this because in February of 2013, after years and years and years of being pressured to address the fact that preparedness in this country doesn't work, they finally did a thing. They brought together what they called a panel of experts, and it was 85 people. I was one of the 85 experts they brought in, and they fully acknowledged they know why it doesn't work. They see it doesn't work. If you look on different websites, if you go to Red Cross, FEMA, any of the major sites, it is still very similar material because to change it is a much bigger deal than it would seem on the surface. So is everybody clear on that? Can we say that all of you now are very clear on where we are with preparedness and that you understand the fear, the threat, and why it doesn't work for the communities you're committed to? Jamila, are we having people in the chat?
Yes, yes, people are responding. Yes.
Excellent. So let's do this. Let's look at what does work because it directly involves you. And here's the deal. We're going to talk about the community-centered resilience piece. Remember, before, all the information was disaster-centric preparedness, where the star of the show is the disaster, and the reason for doing everything in the preparedness world was because of that. This is what community-centered resilience would look like. One, you're preparing to prosper. And remember, you're not preparing for earthquakes, floods, fires, terrorism. You are preparing to be your best self, and you are preparing for your agency to be at its best. Here are the 5 key things that come up over and over again that will be the things that we want to support you in doing. Number 1, get great at connecting and communicating. I'd like you to consider what it would mean if that's the thing you took on. What would it mean for your community if you were brilliant at connecting and communicating? You could reach everyone you serve, you could reach them quickly, you had multiple ways of reaching them. I want you to just picture what that world would look like. And remember, we are preparing to prosper, so it's not just about being able to issue them warnings and alerts and training them about things. Maybe you've got some wonderful thing you want to share with them. Maybe you have an opportunity you want to share with them, and yet you've got all of these communication mechanisms in place to reach them and to reach them quickly, and a backup and a default for if it didn't work. Right? I want you to just picture what your life would look like if you could reach your colleagues that quickly, or if you're somebody that's very familial in your thinking, right? That's the way your heart beats for your family. What would it mean to you to be that good at communicating that you could pick up your phone, and whether it was by text, whether it was by some app, whether it was by email, whatever, you could communicate quickly, effectively, and you had your backup. So that's number 1. Number 2, and this is a very big, important thing. And honestly, I would love to be with you, because as much as I am a great, great appreciator of Zoom, all of the things that I'm sharing with you here, it's so much easier and more profound to do it together. But it's to harness your local wisdom, skills, and knowledge. If you were to look at the however many people we have in this Zoom experience, and if we could take the time, if we were all in person together, we could do an exercise where we're genuinely looking at what unique skills do you bring to this community table. And at the end of that, one, you'd be teary-eyed with, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was surrounded by this level of greatness and wisdom. But also you could realize, yeah, in a crisis, these folks have got a lot that they can do, and together, collectively, we can take over the world. A thing I would invite you to do right now, and again, this is, let us make sure we leave here knowing more about each other than we came here. Put a skill set that you've got. It may not be your number 1 skill set, it may not be the thing you're paid to do, but you could do it. And in a crisis, it's something people could count on you. If I could type, which I can't do right now because I'm presenting, I could put 2 things in that skill set. Number 1, I can basically MacGyver anything. I can look at any object and figure out multiple ways to use it, right? I've led that exercise for, I don't know, a few decades. So not only have I thought about everything, I have listened to thousands and thousands and thousands of answers. So number 1, I can MacGyver anything. And number 2, for the last few months, I've been throwing myself headlong into using AI to support nonprofits. So if we had an emergency, I would be that person who could, 1, figure out how whatever we've got can be used in 100 different ways. And 2, if we had power and a computer, I could have AI help us do whatever it is we needed to do. Please put your skill set in the chat. And I would tell you there is no skill set that is too small. I will tell you that some of the skill sets are unbelievably emotionally meaningful to other people. I've had people have random skills that they contributed. One woman said, as a hobby, she's a speed reader, right? She just she learned to speed read, and she is wicked fast at speed reading. Can you imagine if you have a disaster and you've got someone you could plop all of those disaster books and all of those facts and all of the stuff, and they could just sit there and go because they can speed read that quickly? Unbelievable. If we have time later, I will tell you about the woman who shared how her skill set is cooking. No matter what happens, And it doesn't matter how little or how humble the food is, she will make something delicious for you. That's a skill set. I had another woman who said she is unflappable. She does not get upset. She doesn't get angry. No matter how bad things get, she is the voice of calm and reason. Pretty remarkable. So please put some skill sets in the chat. The next piece is I'd like you to take on practicing, recognizing, and mobilizing your assets. The reality is many nonprofits and many communities are so accustomed to thinking of themselves as being needy that they don't see the assets they do have. And I can tell you that when you do the asset question that I just did with you, the skills question, they're blown away by their own level of greatness. But that just shows you the degree to which we have stripped people of recognizing their own greatness, especially in disasters. In disasters, we have a deep, 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 long-standing thing of acknowledging the responders, right? We praise the responders, and they deserve the praise. I'm always happy to see responders roll in. Absolutely, if my house is on fire, I want the fire department to show up. And we need to honor and acknowledge, recognize, mobilize the skills and assets we have in our community. Number 4, I'm going to ask you to take on actively rejecting the negative framing of your community and for your community. Many communities that are served by the people in this Zoom are almost always presented from a negative perspective, talking about what they don't have and their needs and their vulnerabilities. I'm just saying, if you label people that way, it is hard for them to see themselves differently. And negatively being framed in public meetings, negatively being framed in the media, it has an impact. It absolutely changes how people relate to the community and how the community sees itself. The other piece, and this will come up all the time, is to build your everyday brilliance with community resilience in mind, right? Have it be part of your choice, right? So for example, with Zoom meetings, what would have happened if every single time since the pandemic, when you were on a Zoom, and some of you have been on hundreds of Zooms over the last few years, right? Hundreds. What if you always took on doing things like making the chat a real resource, always making sure that you change your name, even if it's just for that meeting, to what you want to be called and whatever identifiers you want, right? In my case, I always have my first name and she, her. But for some places, it might be really important to have your first name and the name of your agency, right? If you always did that, if you always made sure you had a picture of yourself that was recognizable as you, as your picture online, that would make all the difference. I have friends that I really don't know what they currently look like because they've got the picture of their dog as their Zoom photo, and I love dogs. But it would be nice if we could actually recognize each other. But there are just many things just with Zoom. If we were to take it on that, if I do this every time I use Zoom in a disaster, I will be that much stronger. You would see something quite miraculous. So is everybody good with that? And Ms. Jamila, do we have people putting skills in?
Oh yes, we have an array of skills.
Awesome. Would you read some of
Yeah,
them, please?
sure, of course. Um, Wilderness camping skills,
Yes.
waste management, um, strong sense of direction and loves maps, de-escalation, great listener, gardening, mediation, good at cooking over a camp stove, and knows a lot of camp songs, speaking English and Spanish, guiding people in deep breathing.
Nice. So you see, if we did this as an exercise together, one, we would go deeper because people always dismiss certain things in terms of their own skill sets. They don't view it necessarily as the important skill because it's just something they take for granted. For example, one of the things that I heard was a great sense of direction and good with maps. This is the person that I would trail and follow because I have one of my non-skills, and it's a very strong non-skill for me, is directions. It's a miracle I make it home by myself every night. I can have GPS on and I could have a map and I could still get lost. So I tell people this all the time. I'm not embarrassed by it, but I tell people it because in the same way I'm confident in my skills, I am equally confident about my non-skills. And I don't want anybody thinking that, oh yeah, follow Anna Marie. No, if you follow me, you will be lost. But that's what it means when you start to get to know your community and you genuinely value what every person brings to the community table. It's a game changer to know those skills, be able to call upon those skills, and to leverage those skills. Now I'd like you to consider this through the particular lens of the people you serve. I've got 2 slides here that lists all these different groups, and I want to point out some that have a different level of vulnerability than may be obvious, okay? So I picked on this slide our limited English proficiency community and transgender. If you are serving a limited English proficiency community, your preparedness is different. Your expectations related to what is available might be different based on country of origin. You may wind up in a situation where emergency information is given out, and still, yes, even in 2025, you might get most of that information in English. So it's unbelievably important that if you have very limited English proficiency or you're monolingual, that you have people in your emergency circle and people who you're connected to who speak both English and whatever your language is. Does that make sense for folks? That you should be aware that many, many messages are not going to come out in your language, at least at the front end. And sometimes the front end of the disaster is where you really have to take action. Transgender. Right now, after the last few months, we have seen a full-on assault against members of our transgender community. So if you are transgender, a thing I would be recommending is you take out your phone and you get a little map and you pull up every single organization that serves the LGBTQ community. You make sure you have all of your different friends. You connect to the different law centers that specialize in supporting transgender communities. It's just a completely different level of readiness because we have this extra level of inappropriate behavior towards our transgender community. Can everybody see why going to a generic preparedness class is never going to touch on some of those issues? Because it literally is different steps you need to take. And if you look at this list, it looks as if it's a long list. It's actually not. This is sort of the shorthand of many different populations. On this slide, let's look at the people who are distrustful of any unfamiliar organization. That could be government, it could be Red Cross, it could be a service provider. But if you're distrustful, and especially today where people have so much more reason to be distrustful, you could be missing out on 1, resources, 2, medical assistance, it could be food, it could be any number of things. And people who cannot trust the people who are putting out the official information wind up trusting people who may not have their best interests at heart, right? You could wind up trusting some news source because they've positioned themselves as being not government and not Red Cross and not this and not that. Doesn't mean they have your best interest at heart or that they're giving you accurate information. If you're old enough to remember how Y2K played out, that's exactly what happened. During 1999, so many people were concerned about all the Y2K commentary that they listened to virtually anybody, and I'm not kidding, virtually anybody pumping a message. So people went out there and were telling them, yeah, the planes are going to fall from the sky, your bank's not going to work, blah, blah. It just set them up for being scammed. We will never know how many people were actually scammed out of money because they believed people because they were distrustful of the traditional sources. The other community I want to point out and give a special shout out to is the sobriety recovery community. If you are in the sobriety recovery community, it has been a much more challenging time. Why? Because of some of the basic principles inside sobriety and recovery communities is you avoid your triggers, right? You avoid the extra stressors. You take it one day at a time, sometimes maybe 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time, maybe just a moment in time. And disasters are not friendly in that circumstance, right? Some people, their entire lives, the way they navigate their lives is through the meetings they go to and through being in safe environments. Disasters throw you out of those safe environments and they put levels of pressure on you. So it is unbelievably important that if you're in a sobriety recovery community, that community has the preparedness and resilience resources, because it is a very vulnerable community. Is everybody clear on these two pages? They look long, but they're actually the short form. So when we're asking you to really think about being advocates and stepping up and standing up, it is understanding that people need to speak up and say, yeah, this type of preparedness is going to work for this community, but generic preparedness is certainly not. And if you look at just some of these pieces, you can tell exactly why these communities would not benefit from traditional approaches. Another solution, and I will shamelessly say this every day if need be, we have to embrace optimism, right? We've just talked about how the preparedness is incredibly pessimistic, right? Earthquake, floods, fires, you could die, they're all coming, you can't escape them. That's the messaging. The more optimistic message works better. You could absolutely prepare your community to prosper. You could make it a sloppy, happy love fest. As I told you, I had preparedness as a totally happy, sloppy, loving act. It was not because of fear and threat. It was because I was a big sister, right? So you could see how the more optimistic message absolutely was a game changer. Let's look at it from any other conversation, because honestly, the fact that we have accepted so much fear, so much threat in preparedness is bizarre, because you'd recognize it so much more readily when it's given to you through anything else. So like learn martial arts, but imagine someone telling you do it because that's the way you can avoid being mugged or raped or beaten or violated, so it's that you don't become a victim. That is so anti-motivational, as opposed to people who genuinely take it on to build strength. It's fun, it's social. My former colleague used to teach martial arts, and he said the people who came in because they had been mugged or violated in some way never stuck with it, because it's unbelievably hard to wake up every day and do something that's physically demanding, and you're doing it for a negative reason. I love this one because this is a lesson we can all learn, right? If you are feeding your family rice and beans, if you say to your family, we're eating rice and beans, it's because we're poor, it's all we can afford, we've got to cut corners. Imagine what it feels like to eat. And that's the messaging around it. As opposed to, oh, I happen to know many dozens of people who feed their family rice and beans, and it's delicious, right? It's like the food that they always have cooked, and it's also healthier. If you go to any country where the primary diet is rice and beans, way, way healthier than the traditional American diet. So you could frame it negatively, or you could frame it more optimistically. And as you can see, you wouldn't want to be the recipient of the negative message. Here's one that I always enjoy. Be kind and loving toward your partner, because divorce is expensive. You could be ruined. Dating is hard. It's scary. That's not the reason to be kind or loving to your partner. Can you imagine being in a relationship and the only reason they're being kind or loving to you is because, well, divorce is expensive? Of course you would want a person to be kind and loving to you for other reasons, right? The pessimistic framework, you would absolutely recognize it as terrible. You wouldn't want to be on either side of that. You wouldn't want to be the person giving that type of attention or receiving it. And here's my favorite, because some of you are each other's colleagues and coworkers. Be friendly and helpful. Otherwise, they're going to stab you in the back. Can you imagine living your life with that negative framing? Of course, there's a different way to do it. However, out of this entire list in the middle, the only one we routinely accept is the one about getting prepared. We have always allowed people to tell us the worst possible things, and then we accept it. And then we're surprised that we don't do it. But if you want to really understand why, it's because of this. Shamelessly embrace optimism, and it'll change everything. And by the way, that's not just because I'm a Pollyanna sort of person. this is science. It is backed up. Again, you could go and do any of the research search engines, and it'll tell you that the most important predictor of your overall resilience can be just that piece of being an optimistic person, looking for the best, believing it. Your body actually changes in response to your thinking. So developing those skills of framing things in the positive, sharing it from the positive, helping people to understand that there is a different way to view something is a game changer for mental health, physical health, and all of the above. I want to give you a good example because some of you may actually serve clients that are similar to the clients of the agency becoming independent. The 2014 South Napa earthquake, right? There's an agency and they'd worked with us for a long time. They were clients of ours when I worked at CARD, and their name is Becoming Independent, and they have, I don't know, 800 or 900 people with intellectual disabilities who live independently in homes in the community, right? So these aren't people who are in facilities. They have their own apartments or their own spaces. The earthquake struck, and you can imagine how traumatizing this could be. It was a 6.0 earthquake, but it struck at 3:20 in the middle of the night. However, within 30 minutes of the earthquake, the Becoming Independent staff had already done all the things they had practiced, right? They had 8 staffers who went to respond to clients in the impact area before the earthquake, long before the earthquake. What they had done was they put up a great big map and they matched up the staff and volunteers to where different clients were located. So they knew exactly who was closest and who could get to them, right? They had made contact with the 200 clients who were in the impact area, either face-to-face or by phone because the phone system did not go down. They did home visits, they picked up glass, they did the top, picked up furniture, they did all the things. Only one person had to be taken out just because the house was unsafe. But I would tell you the thing that was so charming about this staff, they said they had a vision for the earthquake. And every time somebody came to them and talked to them about earthquakes, they said, our clients are never going to see the inside of a shelter. That was what fueled them. It's like, nope, if they are a client of ours, they are not going to be the people who get stuck in shelters. And this is what they put in place. And this is how it played out. So you can imagine how many people were just teary-eyed because one agency took on doing this. Imagine being the parent of one of their clients and wondering, is your kid who has an intellectual disability, they may be an adult, but they also have these intellectual disabilities, is this kid safe? And it's like, yeah, they were totally good with it. And it is now an incredibly empowering part of how they train their staff for anything to do with preparedness, response, recovery. If anybody can relate to this, if anybody would like to see that level of resilience in a community, please put that in the chat because I feel almost teary-eyed every time I think of this story just because they were so clear that if it was going to be, they could make it happen, that their clients would never step foot inside a public shelter if they could help it. Here's another solution. And some of you may be readers, some of you may be video people, but I can tell you the answers to talking about preparedness differently, I find them in books all the time. I'm a reader. Like, for example, Brain Rules. In Brain Rules, it makes it very clear. Your brain has a very hard time remembering boring things. If your brain processes something as boring, overwhelming, not useful, it'll actively try not to keep it. So imagine how much preparedness and disaster stuff looks overwhelming, triggering, or the bureaucratic end of it looks incredibly boring. I have gone to hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of preparedness and disaster classes and presentations. A whole bunch of them were terrible, right? So my brain didn't want to retain any of that. One that I think is very good is The Unthinkable: Who Survives When Disasters Strike and Why. She talks about how, and by the way, it is written by someone who is a journalist, so it's not a boring disaster book, but she talks about how the littlest things can make the difference, like the act of next time you're on a plane, pull out that sheet that, has all the instructions. Even if you don't read it, pull it out of the pocket, open it up like this. Why? Because people who watch you open it up then start thinking about what is the information that is on that sheet. So you help them get their brain engaged just by you taking that action of doing this, right? Learned optimism, absolutely. If you want to know more about the optimistic piece and the science behind optimism, this is the book. You will absolutely change how you want to think, how you want to speak, because optimism can change whether teams win or lose. I mean, literally, it is that important. A thing I want to shamelessly point out are the two things about 9/11, which are at the bottom of the screen. One of them, when we get off of this call, you could go and watch on YouTube. It's called Boat Lift, and Tom Hanks narrates it. And it is a beautiful story of regular people who absolutely made a difference during 9/11 without anything other than just being told, your help is needed. The Coast Guard at the end of 9/11, everything had happened and all these people were stuck on the tip of Manhattan Island. The Coast Guard, one of the most successful and skilled in the armed services, somebody got on radio and said, this is the Coast Guard. We have lots of people who are stranded at the tip of this island. If anybody has a boat or anything that could help get these folks off the tip of this island, I know they'd be happy to see you. So it was the Coast Guard admitting that they couldn't get to all of these people. Would anybody like to guess what happened as a result? You can put it in the chat. It was nothing short of an absolute miracle. And we should be telling the stories of successes all the time. What happened was people showed up out of nowhere. Anybody who had, whether it was a rowboat, a yacht, a sailboat, a little, jet ski, anything that could carry people over water, they just came and they just kept coming. People just kept showing up, showing up, showing up until every last person was rescued off the tip of the island. Regular people who were given the power and given the empowerment to see that they could make a difference showed up and absolutely killed it. And I would just encourage you to think about what would happen if the communities you love and you serve were given that level of shameless empowerment. Nobody got on board and said, okay, what we need are boats that are this big or this big. It was like, no, if you've got a way that you can get people over water, they need help. And it was a miracle. Totally worth seeing. So here's a solution that I will stress. In fact, if you were to see me in public and if we had a training together, I say this all the time. Just keep getting connected, keep flexing your ability to connect with your audience. So the question is, which communities will benefit most from being connected? The answer is very simple. Every single community that you care for, whether it's your family, whether it's your literal neighbors, whether it's the people you serve, everybody that you can get to be better connected, get them better connected. Because less connected, when people aren't connected, very hard to get the message out, very hard to have a consistent message, hard to reach them, help them, serve them. They go through way more pain, more suffering, more anxiety, more feelings of being isolated, alone, all of those things. Once people are connected, you get far greater leverage, you get buy-in, you get better health outcomes, you get all of the things. Even just getting a very simple message saying, are you okay? Or if you need something, here's where to call. Right there, that changes whether you believe you are alone and cared for or not. So if I could truly get you to commit to anything, commit to connection, commit to communicating and being connected, and every chance you get, go and connect with people. And by the way, if we were in person, a workshop style thing that I have audiences do is literally go around, cell phone out, and you start connecting with people. You take a selfie with them so you know exactly what their face looks like. You put them in your phone, you get their phone number, you get their email address, you get whichever agency they work with, where you met them, and your phone will become an amazing resource just because you put all the faces in. Here's some connection success stories in the event those of you who are readers or video watchers want to appreciate it. There's a whole book on how social capital, that having a community changes everything when it's time to recover. If you're interested in how language communities transformed things just with a level of connection, this one is A Village Called Versailles, and it was about the Vietnamese community, very much separated by language and very much because they pulled together, transformed absolutely everything. And this other book, A Paradise Built in Hell, talks about lots of different communities that come up in the face of disasters. Of course, what we're pushing is don't wait for the disaster to build the community so that no matter what you go through, you're going through it together. I don't know if you're technology people, but here's what I can promise. Whatever thing that you're trying to do post-disaster or in preparedness or just trying to build a resilient agency, there's an app for that, right? Apps are the thing. And here's your opportunity to make the chat really useful. If there is an app that you use and you find it unbelievably helpful, like you use it all the time, you use it not just for emergencies, but it really makes a difference in your life, put it in the chat. If I were putting things in the chat, I would be putting in ChatGPT, Perplexity. As I told you, I've gotten really into AI of recent times. I do so little without using some aspect of that. So please, whatever your best app is, whatever you like most, stick it in the chat. This one we've touched on several times, but I really can't stress it enough. Program the hell out of your cell phones. You could, and again, if we were in person, I would have everybody pull out their phones and you would just start programming stuff in it. But put things like loved ones and your pets and all your medical information, like you could, and the reason I show pictures of some of the older model phones is because a surprising number of people have older phones. So they're not fancy phones, but you know what? They can still have data in it. So you could literally just pick an entry, right? Like you could put in medication. You could pretend you know somebody named medication. And then in that record, you put all the current medications you take, all the conditions you have. Or if you're the caregiver or provider for someone, you're the person they would call, make sure that you have their medications in the phone. I would tell you that after 9/11, we had so many people who they did not have access to their meds. When they evacuated, they didn't know. The same thing happened for Hurricane Katrina. People evacuated. They had nothing. They had the clothes on their backs. So when they finally saw a doctor, some of them were in really bad shape because they'd just been through something terrible and they had been without their meds. They literally said to the doctor, when the doctor said, "What's your condition?" they would say things like, "Well, I think I take a heart medication." "Which one?" "I don't know. The pill is white and small." That just delayed them getting the level of care they need. So someone having this programmed in their phone and having it backed up in the cloud can make all the difference. Absolutely all the difference. This solution, again, is harvest your brilliance. And you did a great job, apparently, of putting a bunch of skills in the chat. But I would tell you that you have many more skills. And if we channel them toward this conversation, what you will find is you will increase your safety and resilience. On the right-hand side of the page, what you see is that's traditional disaster talk, right? You have to dedicate resources. You're talking about standardized plans. It's very process. It's very much the bureaucracy. You're trying very hard to sort of climb this ladder to this place where someday you'll be safe. Rarely does it work. It doesn't even work for our government partners very well. But if you look at all the different ways you could weave in your skill sets, for example, some of you do employee training, right? Awesome. You could be putting in any bits and pieces of this into your employee training and make all the difference, right? What about recognition? Some of you are probably brilliant at giving people acknowledgement and recognition. And I can tell you from having spent my entire adult life in the field of emergency services, people who do preparedness get very little recognition. Responders get lots of affirmation and acknowledgement and recognition, right? If the fire department gets to your house and puts water on the thing and drags you out and leaves you in front of your burned out house, they still get to be called heroes, right? We still cheer for them. We're like, thank you so much. What do people who do preparedness get? Take your time, think about it. We always know the responders. We always praise the responders. We call them America's finest, America's bravest. I mean, that's how we think of people who respond. But what do we think of and what do we say about people who prepare? The thing that often comes up, and I can tell you because I have focused on preparedness most of my life, you get to be considered oftentimes a pain in the butt. You're like, you're the one who's reminding people that they've got to replenish the first aid kit or put in a new fire extinguisher, right? You get to be that person. You get to be the one who's nudging them along, trying to get them to rotate their supplies or do whatever, right? So what if you became the person who shamelessly, and I do mean shamelessly, went after anybody who's stepping up in the world of preparedness, and you made sure that they were recognized, that they felt acknowledged and appreciated? It's a life-changing experience. I will tell you, I have had grown men who were from the fire department who the first time they got publicly recognized for their work in preparedness, they could hardly choke back the tears because they had spent their lives being acknowledged for being a responder, and they felt they were wasting their time just saying preparedness things. Some of you are naturally optimistic, so you would be great at being that optimism person, right? Inserting the optimism when people start going sideways and saying things, you bring it back to the positive. I highlighted wayfinding because here's an easy one any of you could do. At your office or anytime you're anywhere, when you're giving directions, when you're helping somebody find their way, give them the directions based on safety things. Like, for example, if you were in my house now and you said, where's the restroom? I would say it's down the hall and you'll pass a fire extinguisher on your right. It'll be the next door, right? If at my old office, where all of the supplies were kept, we all knew where that was. So we would tell people, yes, you're going to see a big cabinet where all the disaster supplies are. It's right after that. So anybody, even a brand new person to our office, would know where the safety related things were because every time we gave instructions, oh, that's the way to the kitchen, that's the way out, we did it using that sort of safety resilience wayfinding. I'm saying a simple tool like a whistle can be a game changer. And I mean this with a level of sincerity that it would be more obvious if we were together, but the truth is, we used to require everybody at my office to have a few things in place. A whistle that they had on them at all times, and an incident response card so that, this is our version of a small disaster plan, like how to mobilize people, and a programmed phone. So with a whistle, a response card, and a programmed phone, we could do almost anything. But the people who took on carrying a whistle, honestly, we had so many. This is just a short list of the different success stories. But the reality is that with a whistle, just carrying a nice loud whistle, you can alert people, you can warn people, you can summon people, you can make it that you immediately cut through the noise of whether it's sirens, whatever, and get people to do what they need to do. And the other reason that we embraced giving out whistles is because in all of my years of emergency management, no one has ever said, oh, that brochure saved my life. But I have had more than my share of people saying the difference that happened just because they carried a whistle. And in some cases, they were able to make a difference for their own lives. So somewhere on here, the second one, it says Raphael, an injured Marin County jogger. He was a guy who came to one of my trainings. We told him that if you were going to tell people that he attended one of my trainings, he had to carry a whistle. And he said, sure, fine. He humored me. Put the whistle on his keychain. And he was a young, fit, strong guy. He went running in the Marin headlands, woody, mountainous, all that. And He tripped and tumbled down into this ravine, but he was so badly injured that he couldn't get up. What he was able to do was turn over and get the whistle to his lips. And then he used his breath, the little bit he had, and just kept blowing 3 times, right? Because on the whistle, it clearly says blow once for yes, twice for no, 3 times means help. So he just took a nice calming breath and just kept blowing 3 times, 3 times. Somebody eventually heard him, and then they brought a rescue crew, and he was saved. So when people ask why I could be so nutty about something like a whistle, it's because of that. We have had more stories than I can count of people who were able to self-rescue or save someone else because they had a 50-cent whistle on their keychain. So these are just some of the easy things that we're saying, hey, take it on. It could make a difference. And honestly, training your brain is the most important. So one of the last exercises I want to do with you is this brain training. And it's the difference between what they call divergent thinking and convergent thinking. First, let's learn the convergent one. Okay, what's the name of the eating utensil that goes with a spoon and a knife? Please put that in the chat. And Ms. Jamila, if people start putting things in the chat, please call it out. What's the name of the utensil?
Fork, yeah.
Excellent.
I did
So
a
if people have fork, then we're all good. What do you call the pointy parts of a fork?
tines.
Tines or prongs, correct.
Prongs, yeah.
Which is larger, a dinner fork or a salad fork?
Folks have dinner.
Yep, everybody is right. And that's the essence of convergent learning. You converge on the one right answer. If you had yelled out spatula, it would have been totally wrong, right? So everybody is masterful at convergent learning. Let's practice divergent learning because it is easily one of the greater skills that's fairly easy to instill, and it is life-changing. Divergent thinking. What's one way to use a fork to make money? Please put it in the chat. Do we have any answers?
So it has turn old antique forks into rings.
Yep.
You could sell it. Make into a wind chime.
Yep.
Own a restaurant.
Excellent. All righty. What's one way to use a fork to be safe?
As a weapon.
Yep.
Poke someone.
Yep. See how quickly you go all stabby, but yes, you could poke someone.
Defend yourself.
What's a funny or entertaining way to use a fork?
Someone said to cut things slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Use it to secure a lock in the motel door.
Yep.
Comb your hair is a funny way to use a fork.
Absolutely. You could use it as a back scratcher, any
Fork
number.
in your yard as a prank.
Exactly. So
Dig
now,
out items, a drum, a musical instrument.
exactly. So
Make it a part of your outfit, yeah.
here's the thing. In an emergency or disaster, but also just day to day, which way of thinking and learning is going to be more helpful? Convergent or divergent? It should be fairly easy because if we had an emergency and we do a reconnaissance to see, okay, what kind of supplies do we have? If a person comes back with a box of forks and they look at you and say, do you know these are called prongs? And, a dinner fork is larger than a salad fork. You'd be like, oh God, get this person out of here, right? That's useless information when you are looking to make a difference. But the person who comes and finds a box of forks and comes back to you and says, all right, we've got a box of forks, and they know that they could make money, they could keep us safe, they could entertain us, they could do all those things. That person with that mindset, gold. I'm telling you, gold. So that's the MacGyver exercise that I was talking about. And this is the exercise that Ms. Jamila was talking about when two of her staffers were on their way to a conference and their car broke down. They did exactly the MacGyver thing. They basically strip searched that car, found what they needed to do. They made a sign, they got people, and they self-rescued using ingenuity. I would tell you that if you take on really acknowledging the level of brilliance that is in your community and getting many people, you saw how many answers just came up because I just asked you a couple of questions. I promise you, if you did basically the, an hour and a half, 2 hour class, you would never look at anything the same way. In the same way you could now look at a fork differently, I'm telling you, every single thing you touch, you'd be like, oh, I could use it for this and I could use it for that. It's an entirely different way of seeing yourself as a person of resource. And I would promise you that the communities you serve could use a heavy dose of believing that they are the resource and they are resourceful and that they could make the difference. So that's the end of what I'm going to share, and I want to open it up just for questions. If there are any particular questions, I'm here for it.
Well, I know as folks are putting in the chat any questions that they have, we also have some additional resources from Trauma Informed Oregon that will be shared in the chat as well. So there's a toolkit on self-care and a pocket plan. So I don't know, Christy, if you wanted to speak to that real quick, as folks are generating questions.
Sure, I can take up some time. I know it takes a hot minute to put questions together. We will be, so if you want to continue this conversation about community level work, bringing people together around this topic, Trauma Informed Oregon is going to continue this conversation June 10th at 9 a.m. And during that time, we are going to soft launch our Resilience Toolkit, which has over 160 tools around community building and really resonates, I believe, with Anna Marie's work about embracing optimism and creativity and cultural plurality when it comes to disaster response work and the long time work long after response and preparedness and recovery. So I'm going to pop into chat just a Canva of the toolkit just to give you a sneak peek, and as well as our personal pocket plan if you want to do something right now in terms of thinking about where you are in terms of emotional preparedness. And I'll turn it back to you. Any questions for Anna Marie?
We're getting a lot of responses around thank yous and this being a great presentation. It looks like, do you think brochures can be useful as information bridges for non-English speakers, including universal symbols for various preparedness purposes?
Absolutely. You can have brochures do very well. And depending on how they're written and basically the framing of it, a brochure could be great. The reason I'm usually not pro brochure is because so many of them are written, one, to intentionally be generic, and they frame the disaster, not the community. And honestly, the thing is stop making the disaster the star of the show, right? We need to make the community the star of the show. We need to make it that who we are is a bunch of people who love and care for our community, and I've got your back, right? Not the I'm waiting for the earthquake, and if the earthquake happens, then you can count on me. No, you can count on me every day right now, right? If you need me, I'm here. And the reason I do this isn't because I fear something horrible will happen. I do this because I believe and I know that we can have the great thing happen, right? We need our nonprofits to be awesome. We need them to be strong. We need leaders who are like, yeah, no, we don't speak that way to our clients. I mean, honestly, I think of all the nonprofits I have listened to over the years where they allowed speakers to come in and say horrible things to their constituents. The constituents left afraid and feeling bad about themselves and feeling like they can't protect their own kids. And I mean, just terrible things. But no, we can step up and be like, yeah, no, we don't do that. No, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah, and one of the responses was community resilience. Like what we do is community resilience. We don't do fear, we do resilience together as a community.
And really, the future funding is dependent upon people stepping up and being very honest about why things don't work. Those slides I was showing and all the different populations, I could have gone down and listed why it doesn't work for each one of those different groups, right? If you're dealing with a community, and Mark had this in his brilliant presentation, look how many people are struggling. Look at how many people are struggling financially. And what we're telling them is the only way to be safe and the only way to protect your family is to buy all these days worth of food and buy all these days worth of water and go to these trainings and classes. And by the way, even if you offer the classes and trainings for free, is it really free? No, it isn't. You still have to get there. You still are talking about meals or gas or whatever. Time isn't free. So we have to stop allowing people to just hand out stuff and say, here, now it's up to you. It's your fault if you don't get prepared. No, you didn't provide the right information, right? And we've seen this time and time again. I mean, that's why I will always love the success story of the people who were coming to that conference, and they did exactly what we taught them to do in class, and they did it, and they were so proud of themselves, and that's the way it should be.
Absolutely. Well, we are getting very close to our time, and I'm super thankful and appreciative to Miss Anna Marie Jones for her wisdom and wealth of information that you shared. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone who attended this afternoon for showing up to learn ways to support your community that is filled with love and optimism, and to speak to the brilliance that exists amongst our community, our family, our friends, our colleagues. So with that, thank you so much. This recording will be made available to all who signed up, as well as the chat and other resources that Trauma Informed Oregon shared, including the Alice report, the very newest Alice report that we have from United Way. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And absolutely, anybody who wants to connect with me can connect online, and please use the hashtags, either Ms. Duct Tape or the Disaster Resilient Learning. Make it so that we can find each other, right? Make it so that LinkedIn becomes another resource.
Okay.